Hello and welcome back. Happy Thursday, everyone. Today we are going to be doing a rundown of Dev Diary 165, which is a long one. So make a pot of coffee, have a seat, not at the same time. You probably need to stand to make a pot of coffee, but we're going to be in for it. Put your feet up, except not while you're standing while making that pot of coffee. So let's dive in. I am in Spain, true. Hello and happy Thursday. The lack of capitalization does in fact have us in pain. It is a holiday. It should be capitalized. One day, Victoria will capitalize happy, but it is not this day. She'll probably capitalize it when it's the start of the sentence, the truth hurts. Alright, narrative design lead of Victoria 3. Joining me is Lufthassani, is that Hassani or Lufthassani? Undersecretary of Grace and Justice and lead of Iberian Twilight. Today we will be covering the narrative content for Spain, coming in the Iberian Twilight and update 1.12, as well as the reworked coup system. To properly manage updated coup system. How do we feel about that? I think that that's probably a good thing. The coup is just kind of like a relatively minor event right now, so that's actually pretty cool. If there's big coups and revolution type things, really adding to kind of the layers of political stuff. But to properly manage the breadth and depth of this this content must cover, this diary is split into two sections, so we're only getting half. The first section will cover the free content coming in update 1.12, such as the new Spanish political setup, the Carlist Wars, and the new coup system. The second will cover the paid content contained in Iberian Twilight. Please note, as ever, yes, that any attached screenshots are from work in progress, and certain elements may be final. You could tell how experienced the dev is based on how fast they are to give you the qualifying statement, work in progress, nothing is finalized, etc. Okay, free content. Spanish political setup. If one were to chart the ideological cleavage of Europe in 1836, it would fall between two great alliances. The first and more famous Holy Alliance of the absolutist counter-revolution consisted of Prussia, Russia, and Austria. The second and more immediately relevant, the Quadruple Alliance, consisted of France, Great Britain, and the liberal governments of Spain and Portugal. From its founding in 1834, the purpose of this alliance was to put an end to the parallel civil wars in Portugal and Spain, both fought between liberal constitutional governments and conservatives spearheaded by traditional pretenders to the throne. The civil war in Portugal would end in a liberal victory in May of 1834, whilst the Spain's would continue until 1840, and it is here we find ourselves at game start. Very interesting. So we're going to start out in a civil war. The political situation of Isabella in Spain in 1836 is defined by two trends. The first is the rise of liberalism during and after the Spanish War of Independence, and the second is the secession of conservatism from official politics. With the Spanish conservatives exiled from respectable society by the uprising of Don Carlos, official politics is defined by conflict between the two branches of liberalism, the moderates and the progressives. War never changes. Okay. So we do see we're in a Regenencia starts. We have Maria, who's a landowner. This is a little bit different than what we're used to. We have the moderates, we have the progressives. Okay. No new, what is it? Ooh, that's a different thing. We don't see any sort of different, ideologies on the characters. So let's continue. The Spanish moderates, exemplified by politician Francisco Javier de Istruiz and General Ramon Maria Narvaez. Narvaez represent the conservative liberal tendency in Spanish politics. The moderate party is, foremostly, the party of certain military officers, the members of the clergy who remained out on the side of Queen Isabel, and the Andalusian landowner oligarchy. Their platform stood for limited wealth-based suffrage, state Catholicism, a centralized state, and free trade. During their regency, the Queen Regent Maria Cristina favored this party, as did Isabella during her reign. To represent this oligarchic liberalism, the Spanish landowners start with the modernist ideology, which represents the paternalist ideology. Isn't there modern... Oh, there's modernizer. Now there's this modernist. Did we somehow miss that? We don't see it on the landowners here, but okay, we're going to have endorsing monarchy, makes sense. Strongly endorse landed voting and oligarchy, making the oligarchy swap easier. Interesting. Now, I know that we want to swap, just generally speaking, onto I forget the name of it, but the one that gives you the free government reform, just generally speaking, technocracies. So that they strongly oppose it is maybe a little bit of an annoying thing, but oligarchy's not. Oligarchy, I think a lot of other IGs like the jump from oligarchy to technocracy, so maybe this is overall useful for getting into oligarchy to make the swap to technocracy later, once you don't have someone with this ideology, or you just do it through them and make them really upset. For bureaucracy, we like appointed bureaucrats. Police, the local police force, looks kind of normalish, except for now we also have free trade and state religion as well. State religion, a little bit of a thorn in the side. Like Russia's, if I recall correctly, Russia's like landowners support state religion, or is it that their religious group supports like serfdom or something like this, but it's a little bit more difficult as a result of some of the things they have going on, and so having more groups endorsing state religion is going to make things a little bit more complicated, but you can get off free trade easier. I don't think free trade is very good anymore though, so okay. Throughout our period, the Spanish armed forces constantly involved themselves in politics. Contrary to what one may expect, these interventions were typically on the liberal side, seeking to overturn governments they deemed to be tyrannical in the name of the Constitution. This Praetorian tendency is represented by the liberal Praetorian ideology, which gives the armed forces stances in favor of constitutional monarchy and citizenship right for Spaniards. Okay, interesting. Ouch. We have... Okay, so we're seeing a little bit of more stuff towards entrenching. Some elements of conservative movements, and then while allowing some, like, more progressive stuff. Like, we get the free trade. Here we get the liberal Praetorian, where they are endorsing monarchy, so it's going to be harder to get off the monarchy, but they like census suffrage, and so a little bit interesting here. The Progressive Party represents the left wing of Spanish politics, supporting expanded suffrage, secularism, and a national militia. Famous supporters of the Progressives include Prime Minister Juan Mendizábal and His Highness Captain General Baldomero Espartero, Viceroy of Nevada, Prince of Vergara, Duke of La Victoria, Duke of Morelia, Count of Luchana, and Viscount of Banderas. Just want to put a bunch of names all together so we could show how bad we are at pronouncing Spanish stuff. Historically, the Progressives were in government in Spain until the resignation of Mendizábal in May of 36. However, we have chosen to represent the moderate party as being in government from game start. This is because the electoral victory of the moderates in 34, granting the majority of the Cortes until the election of February of 36. A correct representation of Mendizábal's government would lead to Spain starting with an illegitimate government. A situation, whilst accurate to the challenges faced, is too detrimental to gameplay to be worth it. Yeah, you just drop in on Spain, you're like, what is going on here? So yeah, that makes sense. Isabella in Spain starts with a solid suite of reasonably liberal laws, including new law variants, latifundias. Okay, so we do see a little bit in here. We see that we're starting on oligarchy. Okay, fair enough. Elected bureaucrats, state religion. We do start with the religious school stuff. I've always thought that Spain having no colonial affairs was kind of weird. Given, or like, weirdly representative of a strange sort of backslide. Like, they have the... I understand why it's not like that, because they weren't colonizing as much anymore, but like the history of colonization, they have Cuba as a subject. It just seems a little bit weird. We have land-based taxation as well, and we have special tenant farmers. And interventionism, which is nice, so it's not like we're backward, but maybe a little bit more speed bumps for us. The latifundias law chiefly represents the vast estates of Andalusia, characterized by their precarious employment of day laborers. The poverty and misery of these day laborers gave rise to banditry, woohoo, and left-wing political radicalism. So we have extra political strength to aristocrats, minus investment pool contribution efficiency. I don't think that regular tenant farmers gives us anything like that. It's been a hot minute since we've jumped in, but that is... I mean, I suppose you don't care that much anyways, because the aristocrats aren't going to be the lion's share of the source of investment pool contribution. And you probably want to get... Well, you actually maybe want to stay on this. This is actually kind of maybe a little bit annoying. The Spanish oligarchy law possesses two starting amendments, electoral clientelism, which we discussed in Dev Diary 163, and the Chamber of procurators, which grants a very limited voting franchise. So we see here that we are going to get some votes, and they are going to be based on people with some of the more conservative types in terms of political strength, and some legitimacy based on votes. This is kind of interesting. So this will keep the conservatives relatively strong, because it's not like the academics aren't in here. You know what I mean? It's not like all the upper class pops. It's missing academics and also engineers. And so, okay. We have electoral clientelism, which grants extra authority, and minus electoral confidence impact, and we can meddle in the elections, and then if we don't meddle with like 4 or 5 elections in a row, I think it was, this goes away. Okay. One may notice that the electoral clientelism amendment looks different than it did in the previous step diary. We will go into more detail shortly. Carlist Spain, on the other hand, can be said to be considerably less liberal. As opposed to the national supremacy of Isabelline Spain, she starts the game with subjecthood representing the Carlist rejection of citizenship in favor of the concept of Spain as a union of subjects with the crown. Don Carlos' support for the traditional privileges or fueros of the Basque country against the centralizing drive of liberalism won a great support amongst the Basque populace. Carlist Spain also... Wait, is Spain just divided in two? Is that how we're... Okay, so that's Carlist Spain. And it starts in a revolution, and you can play as either one, and we're showing the political makeup of both. That was somehow... that was lost on me. Maybe I dropped the thread somewhere. Carlist Spain also starts the game with autocracy, as opposed to the electoral oligarchy of Isabella in Spain. This law is something of an approximation of the Carlist approach to royal power. The conservative tradition of the Carlists was one opposed to the enlightened absolutism practiced by the earlier Spanish Bourbons, favoring the traditional privileges of regions and estates, foremostly those of the Catholic Church. One may contrast the Carlist tradition with the Russian absolutism, which within local autonomy was minimal, and the Orthodox Church was an organ of the Tsarist bureaucracy. So we do see we have monarchy and autocracy, we're subjecthood. Tenant farmers, just regular traditionalist, and so, yeah, these laws do not look as good. Carlist Spain, too, has some unique ideologies, mirroring those of Isabella in Spain, where the landowners of Isabella in Spain are modernists, supporting oligarchy and free trade. Those of the Carlists are unapologetically reactionary. Likewise, the Carlist armed forces are just Praetorians, as those of Isabella in Spain, albeit in the opposite political direction. So we do see conservative Praetorian, we like state religion, subject to national supremacy, and we don't like voting, right? We like single-party state, oligarchy, and autocracy. Neutral towards technocracy, so maybe easier to get onto technocracy with that. And then Carlist, we do have autocracy, hereditary bureaucrats, local police force, traditionalism, state religion still, and so, okay. Now that we have covered the internal politics of both sides of the Carlist War, I will briefly turn the Dev Diary over to Tune to cover its unique mechanics. So we have the Carlist War. It's January 1st, 1836. The Carlist situation is, to be perfectly honest, very difficult. While Cabrera is trying to scramble his forces to Mayes, Trasgo. The loyalists in Catalonia can barely be called an army to begin with a well-equipped and trained army of the north due to its leader, Zumal Kargui, in the preceding summer, and while I unfortunately was not able to convince my fellow colleagues to set the start the game back 1 year, but I want you to know that I tried. Very cute. Okay, so this is going to be an interesting, difficult start, I assume, or like kind of one of these new, like, it's Texas, but in Spain, type of thing, where you're thrust into a war that's difficult. For our starting setup, we have divided the Carlist territories into 3 parts to represent the areas in which the movement was strongest and fighting was the most intense. For the purposes of warfare, however, they all form one unified front. The Carlist, because there's only one section in between them. If they didn't make the changes that they made recently, they would have to give them more territory. That's interesting. The Carlist presence in Andalusia, as well as its base of supporters in Galicia, are not represented as part of the war. However, for the owners of Iberian Twilight Immersion Pack, there are also some events to highlight the presence of Carlism in these regions, some of which also ties to the 2 Spain's content further below in this dev diagram. The Carlist War starts out with the game as a guerrilla war, and there are 2 reasons for this. One, the small-scale skirmishes and raids were common practices in the war, in particular outside the Basque country itself. The other reason simply pertains to the realities of the Carlist situation, as both materially and in manpower they were put in a severe underdog position. Admittedly, there's also a third reason for that, is that we wanted to experiment with the concept of guerrilla wars and how low-intensity conflicts in general. Okay, guerrilla wars, low-intensity conflicts in general. This, well, in terms of experimentation and like where this also might be useful, there's limited-scale conflicts are definitely something that would be really nice from the game. In a general perspective, because it's unreasonable for you to full mobilize over some colony in Africa, right? And your populace would be upset about this. And so if they have limited scope wars and a mechanic for limited scope wars, this helps for things. And also, I think that there should be like an escalatory type of thing where you should only be able to mobilize a certain percentage of your forces, depending on like levels of escalation and interest and this type of thing. And if this is the case, then having tiers of wars would be an important thing in general. So this is maybe a seed of a greater and larger mechanic for Vig 3, which is kind of how they've done development, is they put in a little thing that's like not really that big a deal, and then they build on it later. But before we jump into this, I'd like to remind you all that everything you see is work in progress. Oh man, we have a seasoned dev here. Guerrilla Wars, or the Carlist Wars, since it is the only instance of this concept in the game at this point, have a couple of rules that are different from regular wars. Battles tend to be smaller and are spawned at a much slower pace than regular wars. Okay, interesting. We have a new set of battle conditions that occur that are very specific to guerrilla wars. In general, they have larger focus on inflicting more morale damage on the enemy and hopefully receiving less morale damage back from them. Many character traits have been adjusted to account for this, so that some may not be considered useful in regular warfare will slot now better into guerrilla style combat. Oh, interesting. So if you have a much smaller force, but you're doing better morale damage, you can overcome a bigger force. I mean, that makes sense. Very interesting. Also gives asymmetrical ability to oppose larger powers, especially in instances where they're sticking their thumb where it doesn't belong. Eventually, however, guerrilla war has to change, and this may differ from case to case. If we do this in the future, it may establish some new generalized rules if we believe it is worthwhile. But the Carlist War specifically, this is done by either side taking a decision in the form of journal entry button. Normally, the full-scale war is launched by the Carlists assembling their forces and going to offense through the Royal Expedition, the last major military effort by the Carlists, which led the attack directly on Madrid. But should they falter or otherwise waste too much time, we will allow liberal Spain to force their hand and escalate it themselves. While territories do not exchange hands during the guerrilla stage of the war, you're just doing morale damage, I guess. Both sides can obtain points by leading victorious battles, and once the war itself escalates into its final stages, both sides will be granted a modifier that buffs their combat capabilities for a short period, allowing the war to conclude in a bloody and explosive finale. So you're building up momentum for when it does pop. Where else could this be useful? I mean, what's coming to mind is, like, you have these low-scale conflicts, and then you escalate them more and more and more. And in particular, I can see an instance where, look, the thing I want reworked more than anything else is the Diplo play, but I could see a world where, like, the Diplo play starts with a low-scale conflict, and you can't escalate to a higher tier 1 without incurring a lot of infamy. And so you have to fight this lower scale thing and slowly gain traction and this type of thing. You can't commit too many resources because, for whatever reason, Great Britain doesn't like the mobilization of the entire nation to deal with a colony in Africa. And so, you know, this type of stuff builds and builds and builds, and then eventually you can declare a real war, and then it's like it's Great Britain saying, no, enough of this, and then send, like, the troops in and this type of thing. And it's, from a simulation perspective, does seem a bit better, but also makes it so that your ability to generate interests in an area and project control over the rest of the map can control how much you can escalate, and so you can't have these, like, nonsense things where, like, Greece with their limited navy is somehow, conquering Transvaal and this type of thing in South Africa because they don't have the means by which to project enough influence in the region to escalate beyond, like, a lower tier war, in this case, like, maybe a guerrilla war. So, interesting ideas. Perhaps they're not they're not showing their cards in terms of where they think the guerrilla wars might also take place, but that's just, like, what comes to mind. A guerrilla war is a special kind of war subject to a set of distinct rules from regular warfare, the details of which can differ from one guerrilla war to the other. The following general rules are applied during guerrilla war. Battles have a much smaller size and are created at a lower pace. The skirmish, ambush, and disarray battle conditions can occur. Victories do not grant occupation score. A guerrilla war may escalate into a regular war if conflict's specific conditions are met. We see the Carlist War, we see some score, and this is in the guerrilla phase, and so this does seem to be its own, like, journal entry. International situations journal entry. Okay. Another little experiment comes in the way of character bios. In this way, Mr. We're not going to pronounce this incorrectly again, who is no longer present at game start, but was incredibly influential personality in this war, so we felt the need to make some space for him in the journal entry. We see character bio here. We see born, died, of course died before game start, sometimes referred to as Uncle Thomas. Jeez. The America in me just immediately has, the feels. By his soldiers, he was a Basque military officer and capital general of the Carlist forces in Navarra and the Basque country, responsible for the organization of the army as well as the decisive early victories for the Carlist cause. His sudden death on account of a gunshot wound, usually those do cause death suddenly. In the battle, it's shout out to Stonewall Jackson. In the shot by his own men. In the field of early summer 1835 resulted in a considerable setback for the Don Carlos ambitions. Alright. We have also ensured to update the Liberal and Carlist forces respectively, including their unit types and generals. Spain and Portugal had their starting text adjusted to include Napoleonic warfare, allowing them to use mobile artillery at game start. Interesting. Do they have... Napoleonic doesn't have skirmish though, right? It's just the artillery? So I wonder if they have skirmish infantry now. Probably not. Maybe I'm misremembering the tech tree a little bit there. On the Liberal side, His Highness Captain General Baldomero Espartero, Viceroy of Navarra, soon to be Prince of Vergara, Duke of La Victoria. Do we really need to put all of these titles in every time? I know you copy-pasted it. Do you really type this all out? Okay, fair enough. Leads the forces of Queen Isabella north, and while I'm sure the greatness awaits him, you can tell it's not Victoria because he said while instead of whilst. I'm sure, and also, what's this? What's that about? Okay. It should be capitalized, the thing. So should have the Happy, though, before the Thursday. Awaits him there. He will be opposed on the other end by Rafael Maroto and Vicente Gonzalo Moreno, and the later starting off as the leader of the Carlist army after this gentleman's death. Though I'd like to highlight... there's another one. I'd like to highlight Ramon Cabrera instead, who is building up quite a capable force in Maestrazgo, further south himself. So we see Ramon, we see charismatic, wrathful, supply requisitions expert, pillager, and expert offensive planner. I wonder if supply requisitions is going to be useful. Okay. Oh, he's just highlighting it for it to look at. Yeah, he's Carlist too. Yeah, that makes sense. Alright, so we have coups. My Russian history professor once very definitively said there's no day two of a coup. That's a nice little rhyme. He went on to explain what was necessary to carry out a successful coup: control of the information environment, a lack of organized opposition, and most importantly, speed. Once a coup begins, it is on a timer. For each hour between the start of operations and the seizure of central power, its chances of success precipitously decline. A sitting government that maintains some semblance of legitimacy may stir formerly passive actors into active opposition to the coup, forcing the coupists to either stand down or escalate into civil war. The history of Iberia and Latin America through the 19th century is rife with coups. The image of the pronunciamiento, a military unit organizing its opposition of the government and rallying to its side, is a powerful one and repeats over and over in histories of the time period. With the content in this update largely being themed around Iberia, then, we have taken the opportunity to form a new, powerful, universally applicable coup system. Update 1.12's coup system replaces the coup journal entry. So this is how it's represented currently. It's kind of a little bit of a surface level thing. Contained in the Voice of the People immersion pack, and makes it free to all users. As a result, we've decided to make the new paid deposed ruling dynasty decision and country-specific patriotic sachets contained in Iberian Twilight that will also be unlocked by Voice of the People. Will also be unlocked. Okay, fair enough. So the new coup system is also unlocked by the DLC that unlocks the old coup system. Or the flavor of the coup system, I guess. Okay, if an interest group's approval is below -10 and the country has an applicable military commander belonging to this interest group, they will begin a coup inside the government. Yikes. So now you have to care a little bit more about generals, their ideologies, how happy things are. This all makes a bunch of sense. Love to see the internal agency by the military. The chance for a successful coup is calculated off the commander's coup strength compared to the sitting government's coup resistance. These terms make a lot of sense. A commander's coup strength is calculated by their popularity, the number of units they command, and their proximity to the capital. All of this makes so much sense. And the clout of their interest group, as well as any other bonuses or malices provided by narrative content. The government's coup resistance is largely calculated from its legitimacy, as well as the presence of armed institutions that may rival a standing military in a pinch. So having commanders that are not in the opposition? Okay. It's an attempt by an angry interest group to overthrow a sitting government. The risk of the coup increases when the military is ruled by a government with low legitimacy, etc. Once a coup begins, if it reaches 100%, the commander will execute a coup, or they will issue a pronunciamento. A successful pronunciamento will cause the overthrow of the government. The progress of the coup is determined by the coup strength of the commander, etc. I think we kind of already saw some of this, and we have coup strength, coup resistance. Once it begins, a coup will progress according to the ratio between the coup strength and coup resistance, and one may see here the progress of the coup is greatly benefited by the stunningly high popularity of His Highness Captain General, this guy with 1 million titles, Mother of Dragons. Historically, His Highness took regency over Spain over Queen Regent Maria Cristina following the Revolution of 1840, and an event one may recreate if the commander coups the regency. Alright, so we do see that's a lot of progress. That's some fast progress, eh? The strength is 13. It's 4 to 1. So what if it's 1 to 1? We get 10 progress. Is that the idea? And then we have coup strength and popularity are pretty high. And okay, National Guard helps to defend against it. Is interesting. A successful coup may have different effects depending on circumstances. In this case, Spain is electing a law in the petite bourgeoisie dislikes, and the enactment of this law will cease a law that they prefer to be activated instead. Additionally, Spain will be forced into a petite bourgeoisie dominated government for the next 2 years or until the next election. I assume they will lock you in on the law that they are forcing you to enact, or do they just mean it just auto-enacts the law rather than you put you in the process of enacting? I guess it's probably auto-enact it. And once the progress bar reaches 100%, the coup's commander will issue a pronunciamento. Attempt to exile or retire the coup commander while the journal is active, whilst... Is Victoria back? The journal entry is active, will also trigger a pronunciamento, albeit one whose strength is reduced by a function of how premature it is. Depending on the circumstances, the government will either have a chance to try and resist the coup, or it will be forced out of power. The former will occur if the pronunciamento has been triggered by attempting to exile or retire the coup commander, or the coup resistance and coup strength of the government and commander are relatively evenly matched. The latter will happen if the coup strength of the commander enormously eclipses the coup resistance of the government. Popular commander gonna be a little bit better at it, so he is going to say, y'all's gotta leave. If a coup fails, a portion of the military proportional to the popularity of the coup commanders will become radicalized, and will, as will the members of the interest group. In certain circumstances, one can orchestrate a coup against the government themselves. Those who own Iberian Twilight, or Voice of the People, may use the make use of the deposed ruling class decision, which initializes a coup to replace the ruling dynasty of the country. If one wishes to restore King Miguel as Portugal, for example, one may do so by recruiting a Miguelist commander and getting them into a position where they may overthrow the constitutionalist government. Man, are we just gonna have the easy peasy overthrow the monarchy lemon squeezy? Depose ruling dynasty. The return of the ashes. Surveys, yeah, okay. Kind of normal stuff. It looks like we're praying in France. Gotta have France on the coups and revolutions. But we can choose to do this. Alright. Fair enough. We will now transition to the narrative content contained within Iberian Twilight proper. Paid content, the two Spains. Throughout the 19th century and the 20th century, Spain was racked by an unusually fierce conflict between the forces of liberalism and conservatism. Unlike most other European nations, within which conservative forces typically reconciled themselves to the popular sovereignty, constitutionalism, and the other foundational liberal principles, many Spanish conservatives remained intransigent to the bitter end. This dynamic can be attributed to the means in which liberalism arose in Spain. The Spanish liberal tradition is typically said to have originated with the Napoleonic invasion of Spain and the Cortes of Cadiz. The particularly refined, enlightened absolutism of the Spanish Bourbons has centralized all the political authority in the person of the king, rendering the traditional parliaments of Spain entirely obsolete and powerless. With the King of Spain in the custody of Napoleon and the detested Joseph Bonaparte having replaced him on the throne, Spain had no legitimate central political authority to speak of. To coordinate their resistance against Napoleon, Spanish municipalities organized juntas with little legitimacy or formal process beyond pure necessity. The Cortes summoned these juntas was a peculiar body, traditional and formed, drawing its name from the ancient Castilian parliament, yet modern in substance. The Cortes, also known as the Cortes of Cadiz, has a very particular constituency, the powerful merchant guilds of Spain's coastal cities, a demographic vastly more liberal than the Spanish populace as a whole. The constitution they promulgated in 1812 was thus a very liberal document. At the same time, the Cortes was writing and promulgating this very liberal document, a revolution was taking place within the Spanish military. The war against Napoleon rebellion presented an opportunity for social mobility, with many former commoners and members of the middle class gaining notability and status as guerrilla fighters. With everything to lose from a restoration of strict traditional hierarchies, these soldiers and officers became very liberal constituency. Very interesting. With the restoration of King Fernando VII in 1812, set the pattern of what was to come next. His abolition of the constitution and attempt to restore the makeup of Spanish government as it was prior to the Wars of Independence set off a chain of military revolts. Understandably, people had gotten a little bit of social mobility, they didn't want to lose it. The successes of these revolts in 1820, which set off a brief restored constitutional governance, made it apparent that a full restoration of traditional monarchy would not be possible. Even after the Triento Liberal, or the 3 liberal years, had been put to end by 100,000 French soldiers, the absolutism system was unable to fully reassert itself. At the same time, the economic base required to solidify a liberal system was also lacking. Spain had very little industry to speak of, with the great agriculture of the states of Andalusia belonging to a sole economic sector of note. Representing a largely illiterate population still engaged in pre-modern modes of living, the Spanish parliamentary system became captured by an oligarchic agricultural interest and capable of little effective administration. Spain would thus become embroiled with a cycle of coups, as Praetorian military commanders sought to enforce a standard of good liberal governance on a government with little material base to stand on. Yep, you gotta build on strong foundations. That makes sense. That's kind of interesting. The lack of economic activity of Spain throughout much of the 19th century led to a particularly traditionalist form of Catholicism, typical of Spain, to be left largely unchallenged by typical drivers of secularization, urbanization, and disruption of traditional communities by integration into the market. This staunch Catholicism formed at the base of Spain's conservative movement for an entire period, providing the constituency for the 3 Carlist Wars and eventually the Great Spanish Civil War of 1936. The Two Spains journal entry is unlocked after the First Carlist War ends. Whether it's won by the Carlists or the Cristinos, it represents the push and pull of liberalism and conservatism across modern Spanish history, only ending once one side has established complete dominance. We do see the events, and it will add the journal entry using our classic art. This journal entry has 2 progress bars. The first tracks the relative dominance of conservatism versus liberalism in Spain, and the second the tension between the 2 sides. Oh, is this new, where we can have a double progress bar in terms of modding? Modders might be happy about this. As tension increases, the movement activism will increase across the board, and Spain's coup resistance will decrease. If one wishes to make a sudden political change to defeat the other side, one had best hope that they thoroughly purge the military of any commander who is likely to launch a coup. We do love ourselves a good purging. We see the tension and the balance here. Okay, seems pretty cool. We also see it telling us the trend towards which things are headed, which is nice. The liberal and conservative sides benefit from the clout of core interest groups, Intelligentsia and trade unions on the left, landowners and Catholic Church on the right. They also benefit from either liberal or conservative leaning interest groups, military units commanded by liberal or conservative commanders, and liberal or conservative political movements. Man, Spain's going to be a blast to play. One may note that socialist socialist leaders and political movements do not count as liberal for the purposes of this journal entry, yet may still benefit from its movement activism. We're not going to count them as liberal. I mean, not liberal in the classical sense, I guess. If one chooses to fight the liberals, one should be wary of split between liberals and socialists, possibly leading to a reactionary resurgence in the late game. Yeah, I mean, I guess that makes sense. Like, classical liberalism is not the... Yeah, okay, fine. Okay. Regeneration. The need to drive through economic reform is one of the main features of 19th and 20th century Spanish politics. Once you progress sufficiently in the game, you'll be presented with a plan for rather ambitious economic reforms. You can delay these for a while. Why would we delay economic reforms? But should you choose to commit yourself to seeing the plan through, you will be presented with new economic regeneration journal entry. Okay, so it's adding a bunch of things to the journal entry, a bunch of, I assume, objectives. The Spanish economic regeneration content is structured similar to the Tanzimat content cluster, having a master journal entry that tracks the completion of various sub-journal entry goals. However, compared to that content, it also comes with a few more bells and whistles. Completing the master journal entry will be beneficial for Spanish political stability, so a little bit fewer coups, while the completion of the sub-journal entries will primarily affect the performance of your economy. Okay, this makes some sense. Yeah, this is just the main one where we have the other ones in it. If completing all the sub-goals within the allocated time proves to be too ambitious an undertaking, we could always adjust your public expectations through the rewards, though the rewards for doing so will be lessened. However, if you want to prioritize economic development over political stability, focusing on a smaller amount on the economic sub-goals might be worth it. Focusing on a smaller amount of sub-goals might be worth it. Wouldn't you want more sub-goals for more rewards? I guess less speed? I think you just always want max rewards. Greed is good, as they say. So, we do see extra liberty desire or minus liberty desire, plantation throughput, capitalist contribution efficiency as the reward, creative accounting, we do see landowner contribution efficiency, and then we see farmer political strength, so the rewards on that are maybe not so good. We see agriculture, extra birth rate for 10 years, that's going to be nice. Mines throughput, this kills mines throughput if failed, okay. Relatively modest, nothing too insane. Railway throughput, political strength of capitalists, capitalist contribution efficiency. I hope the railway throughput is a decaying modifier. That would be kind of nice. Just so you don't randomly get spiked at the very end with a bunch of infrastructure need. We see migration, attraction, manufacturing industry throughput strong. Okay. And for 10 years... It's interesting to see them give bonuses. Usually the bonuses are temporary just in terms of, like, game design principles, and these are temporary as well. These sub-journal entries come with their own way of modifying targets, i.e. for the sake of political stability, you really want to see the master journal entry through. But if you find the goals of one of the sub-journal entries particularly difficult to complete, you can always adjust its goals somewhat. The success of such adjustments are tied to your laws and institutions, and if successful, it will make the journal entry in question more easier to compete, though its rewards will also be significantly reduced. Okay, Spanish New World content. This is a little bit interesting. If you boot up the game as either Spanish liberals or Carlists and try to sign a treaty with one of your former colonies in the West, you will quickly realize this is easier said than done. The massive diplomatic resistance you see here is there to model the fact that in 1836, Spain does not yet formally recognize the independence of her old colonies on the American mainland. What do you mean old colonies? They are colonies still. The American Wars of Independence are still fresh in the mind of the Spanish policymakers, and though the liberal government of Isabel has expressed an interest in normalization, no such treaties have been signed. A dummy journal entry in the outliner will hint that there's a decision to be made in regards to this once you've sorted out the minor domestic squabble of the First Carlist War. Once that's done, you'll have the choice of moving towards a historical route of negotiation and diplomatic recognition, or an ahistorical one of colonial restoration. Let's go! Colony time. We do see Old Empire is gone. Nope. Cowards, send for the war minister. Treason shall not be rewarded. Let's go. Restore the colonies. Pursuing normalization will grant you the Hispano-America journal entry, a piece of content centered around signing treaties with your former American subjects, and featuring news content specific for recognized independence treaty article. That's cool. We're not going to do that, but Hispano-America, and we will say we need 100% of these to not have independence not recognized by Spain. Okay. And what do we do if we've completed? A little bit of influence and leverage generation and improves relations by all of them. We are the leader of power block. Spain gains 100 leverage with all... Okay, so we can pull them all into our block easier. But can't we do that with violence? The old metropole. While Granada appears to be both an appears and acts as a fully sovereign nation, our standing in the eyes of the world will forever remain uncertain as long as our former overlords withhold recognition. We should, okay, so this is from the perspective of New Granada. We should strive to establish good relations with Madrid, or present such a mighty visage to the world that none may dare question our legitimacy. So this will be cool from the other end as well. Former recognition. Well, Spain's former colonies of the Americas served as de facto independence following the Spanish-American Wars of Independence in the early 19th centuries. No de jure recognition of the status followed. De jure, of course, being by everyone's agreement, and de facto being, like, bro, I have it, it's mine. Until Spain formally recognizes the independence of the former colonies using the Recognized Independence Treaty article, bilateral diplomatic relations will be severely hindered. Okay, if you complete it, you get some influence and mass migration attraction for 10 years. Fair enough. As your former subjects have also received a new journal entry penalizing for the lack of diplomatic acceptance, they are likely to be quite receptive to your advances. In exchange for recognition, you may be able to extract some important or economic concessions from them, making it really easy to get a power block of them. On the other hand, if you choose to go down the path of colonial restoration, you'll be granted... well, you could also use the Sovereign Empire power block and re-subjugate them that way. On the other hand, if you choose to go down the colonial restoration, you'll be granted the Reconquista journal entry. Isabel's predecessor, Ferdinand VII, had long entertained the ideas of reconquest in the New World, but a lack of means, funds, and diplomatic wiggle room had prevented those ambitions forever materializing. Should you pursue this path, you may find, which you should pursue, unlike Lubu, you should find yourself with Uncle Sam and John Bull breathing down your neck rather quickly, but that would be the restoration of Spanish rule over the American mainland, but would the restoration of Spanish rule over the American mainland not be worth such a risk? And so, yeah, it would be. So we can try and reestablish all of these in the Reconquista, and if we are, in the event our American Empire, we can choose one of these two as our reward, I suppose. Some authority, prestige, convoy, escort, defense, or some authority, prestige, and morale stuff. Okay. We get the Glorious Revolution. In 1868, the ineffectual rule of Queen Isabel II led to a military rebellion that toppled the Spanish Bourbons and sent the royal family freeing to France. This rebellion was christened the Glorious Revolution by the liberal press at the time and led to the convening of the provincial government to decide Spain's future form of government. Historically, the provincial government decided early that it wished to restore a monarchy under a different royal house. This led to the provincial junta embarking upon a diplomatic adventure across Europe. So weird. We gotta find a king, bros. One which would end up sparking the devastating Franco-Prussian War. It would historically end in the short-lived reign of King Amadeo, the first and only Savoyard king of Spain. If Spain has a successful coup against an unpopular monarch, whilst tension in the two Spain's journal entry is sufficiently high, the ruling dynasty will be swept off the throne and a provincial government declared. Makes sense. Pretty cool. A recent coup, we get plus 50 legitimacy. Okay. We get regency period, though. Fair enough. The Glorious Revolution event will convene a regency under whoever's the coup is put in power, typically the leader of the coupist general's interest groups. With the Glorious Revolution journal entry, Spain will be able to choose between a variety of candidates to occupy the throne. Though these buttons, one may approach different foreign powers, possibly diplomatic consequences, or choose a candidate closer to home. Possible candidates include the House of Braganca, Savoy, Hohenzollern, both branches of the Spanish Bourbons, and declaring a republic? Crown Isabellan. Or Carlist King? What are we looking at here? Republic. Hail His Majesty Baldomero, Divine Constitutional King of Spain. So, bringing him back? Is he the Carlist guy? I can't remember. I think he is. Okay. Anarchism. Spain is famous for its anarchist movement. This movement led to reached its culmination during the early days of the Spanish Civil War, in which a workers' council under the umbrella of the anarcho-syndicalist CNT-FAI were able to credibly challenge the Republican state institutions within Catalonia and Aragon. While certainly the most famous case, this was not the only major example of anarchist revolutionary activity in Spain. In December of 1933, Spanish anarchists launched a major insurrection in Aragon with the Austrian CNT-FAI Asturian, sorry, not Austrian, contributed to the Asturian Revolution of 34. The thought that Pierre-Joseph Proudhon heavily influenced the federal Republicans who waged the Cantonal Rebellion of 1874 in the names of establishing a revolutionary federal republic. The origins of the Spanish anarchist movement can be traced to federal republican efforts to organize workers in the aftermath of the Glorious Revolution of 68. In 69, federal republicans launched an uprising in Catalonia, Aragon, and throughout Spain, which failed disastrously. The failure of the uprising and subsequent discrediting of federal republicans led to certain workers' organizations to follow their own political course. Meanwhile, Mikhail Bakunin, father of collectivist anarchism and one of the major actors within the International Workingmen's Association, or First International, had dispatched the Italian anarchist Giuseppe Finelli to investigate the aftermath of the 68 revolution. Throughout Finelli's efforts, the leaders of the Spanish labor movement were brought into contact with the First International, with the International Bakunist faction having its first mover advantage. Throughout the 60s and the 70s, Marxist faction of International made a few inroads with the Spanish labor movement, leading them falling far behind the anarchists. The First International split in 72, the triumph of the Marxist and the expulsion of the Bakuninist dominated Spanish section of FRE expelled the Marxists. Sorry. The anarchists' fortunes did not last. State repression soon followed, driving the FRE underground and stripping it of its connections with its legal labor associations. However, the organization's death knell came with its turn to terrorism. The propaganda of the dead, becoming the dominant doctrine of FRE, alienated the hopes of acquiring mass base, cratered its membership, and incurred further state repressions. The trade unionist faction split from the insurrectionary faction in 81, leaving its organization defunct. A similar dynamic movement continued throughout the 19th century, with its constant conflict within the anarchist movement, proponents of terrorism and trade unionism. The particularly brutal and incompetent conduct of Spanish police in their repressions, exemplified by the torture of prisoners in the infamous Montjuic prison, led to the persistence of active insurrectionary anarchists current in Spain in the 20th century. It would take until the 1910s and the rise of the CNT-FAI for the trade unionism to achieve conclusive victory. The Internationalists represents a birth of Spanish anarchist movement. Once the anarchist movement becomes relevant, this journal entry will appear, granting Spain an anarchist agitator from abroad. Nice for getting multiculturalism. The journal entry may end in either a government or anarchist victory. The anarchist victory may be achieved via driving the anarchists to revolution, while a government victory by marginalizing or wiping out the anarchist movement for a certain period of time. Whilst this journal entry is active, Spain will have an elevated chance of getting propaganda of the deeds event as detailed below. We have the Internacionalistas here, which is Internationalists in English, I assume. But we do have Best of All Possible Worlds for government victory, Black Tempest, Civil War, okay, etc. Additionally, the Iberian Twilight now includes several events applicable to nations with high activism, anarchist, or nihilist movements. Nothing really matters about that, though, so we'll skip this section. Okay, let's come back. Once one has restored anarchism, and one has had these movements, the anarchists will adopt the doctrine, propaganda of the deed, an insurrectionary doctrine commonly associated or commonly adopted by anarchists between the late 19th century and early 20th century. The doctrine called for individuals to carry out high political assassinations against politicians of business leaders with the goal of proving that the state was not invincible. The supporters of this doctrine believed that this would inspire further revolutionary activity among the masses, a thesis that would not come to be. In Spain, the argument over the propaganda of the deed led to a split between insurrectionary anarchists and the anarcho-syndicalists, who favored revolutionary agitation within the trade unions. Yeah, it makes some sense. But we get the propaganda by the deed. Terrorist attacks against our executives, politicians, or ruler. That'll be so annoying if you, like, craft getting the perfect leader for the leader traits, and then womp womp, they get assassinated. Oh, the truth hurts. Once the doctrine of propaganda of the deed has rooted itself within the anarchist movement and the activism of the movement remains high, the anarchists will begin a campaign of terrorist attacks and assassinations against one's political executives, rulers, and heirs. Each terrorist attack will reduce the anarchist movement's pop attraction for some time, representing their historical effect of isolating the movement from its prospective base and stirring popular support for state terrorists. Interesting. Messengers of death. Alright, this guy dies, mortality per turmoil, and decreased attraction to the movement. Ultramarine ambitions. The concept of a prestige war, or war waged in an attempt to demonstrate one's relevance on the world stage, enthralled various Spanish governments of the 19th century. That's because they remembered the 15th and 16th century, eh? That is to say, in an attempt to recover its status as a world power, Spanish armed forces decided that true glory came from bullying smaller nations like Morocco. Not fighting the actual big guys. Okay. Of course, getting involved in a land war in Africa for reasons pride could never cause problems, basically. So we see border harassments, an eye for an eye journal entry. What a nice little name for it. We get a claim on Al Reef. Claims are always good, though. The Spanish Africa event chain is an experimentation in escalating commitment. Oh, yes. 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 So this is like, I want like escalating diploplay stuff to be tied to like escalating interest levels and your ability to operate within the region to be throttled by your interest level and this type of stuff, and there to be a sort of escalation type thing. So this sounds good to me just by its name. As Spain achieves one objective, establishing a security zone around Melilla, snatching an easy colony in West Sahara, the armed forces will request more and more, gradually dragging them deeper into Africa. Okay, this isn't what I expected. And towards larger conflicts. As one progresses through these journal entries, the bonuses they provide the armed forces clout will grow larger and larger, and the rewards for failure will get more severe. This certainly makes some sense. It looks like we don't really see what the rewards are, except at the very bottom here, where we'll get 50 legitimacy for 50 years. That's not really that crazy, but okay. We have a bit of a kind of railroading towards going after Maghreb now. If one manages to succeed in all these objectives, the cumulative prestige rewards will be quite lucrative, and Spain will have acquired a respectable African empire to go along with it. And that's all. Thank you for reading. This was a long dev diary. Due to the sheer volume of text we have managed to write, yes, we will have a compressed diary release schedule. Next Monday, we will cover Spanish colonies and as well as some other minor nations. On Thursday, we will cover Portuguese content as well as Pan-Iberianism. After this, we will be releasing a bonus dev diary on the 24th to cover the remaining dev diary content we have yet to discuss. But that is it for what we have taken a look at today. Quite a bit of content for being in pain, our personal favorite. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell, etc. And also, if you want to support this channel, a really good way to do it is to, if you're going to be purchasing a Paradox product at full price, Iberian Twilight going to be one of them. You can buy from the official website using our code Generalist in all caps. This won't save you any money, but it does send 12% of the sales our way. As usual, if you're in USD, it's going to be like the same price, but if you're not in USD, different exchange rates are going to mean that it might be a different price. Don't pay extra if it's cheaper on Steam, but that is a good way to do it with a slight inconvenience. You'll have to use a promo code to activate your product, and they will email it to you. But other than all that, y'all have a happy Thursday.